We're starting the show a little bit different tonight. No intro for your video viewers. We're here. We're experiencing a little bit of technical issues because of the thunderstorms in my area. You got thunderstorms up there tonight, Derek?
Tonight, no, but we got hammered late yesterday and overnight last night. So a lot of water here.
Yeah,
a lot of standing water.
We don't have tornado warnings or thunderstorm warnings. We have flash flood warnings with potentially up to 3 inches of rain within an hour in areas. So it's going to be could be an interesting night. I'm attributing some of our little technical glitches to the increased electrical activity in the air because they're warning us through the weather channels that the lightning is coming from the clouds to the ground tonight.
Cool.
I don't know where lightning normally goes. It normally goes from the ground to the clouds, but either way,
it actually depends on how everything is lined up and the particles and whether it comes from clouds to ground to clouds, or sometimes it actually meets in the middle. There's concrete photos and evidence of all of it. So
usually clouds and ground are part of the equation. I don't see why that's news.
Oh, I get it. Yeah, I see what you're saying there.
Okay.
Well, I mean, maybe people think that they're just warning you that it's not going to be cloud to cloud lightning. It is actually going to be coming to the ground. So
I guess it could potentially hit you. So it gives us something to worry about since we're not talking. Well, we're done with weather talk tonight. Well, weather's a conversation everybody wants to have. So we're starting out with the weather chit chat. How's the weather up there, Derek? Oh, pretty good up here.
Hey, weather impacts your driving.
Oh yeah, don't forget to turn those hazards on if you're out and about tonight.
And remember,
everybody know you're a moron. Turn those hazards on.
Wipers on, headlights on.
And
if
hazards.
You turn around in the dark with your wipers on without your headlights on, you shouldn't be driving.
I don't understand why everything in the damn car is all automated. I mean, you get into a Tesla, it starts itself. It figures out it'll roll the windows up if it rains, et cetera, if it rains. But it won't turn the headlights on. I believe that as headlights should come on if the wipers have made more than 3 passes, the headlights should pop on. I mean, hell, they come on parking decks. They come on when you go through a tunnel. Why can't they come on automatically when your wipers activate? It would save a lot of these morons out there. And then tie the taillights into that feature too.
Yeah. Yes.
I hate the people who drive around with their daytime running lamps and then they go, they don't turn their headlights on. Well, my headlights are on. Well, we need your taillights as I'm approaching you at 60 miles an hour and you're driving 12.
Yeah.
Because I have good tires and you're running on racing slicks.
Yeah. Which I don't even understand. Are there even cars anymore in 2024 that the taillights don't come on at night? Like, I know it used to happen more frequently, but I got to believe that's done now, right?
No, I mean, if you have auto headlights, the headlights will come on and turn on the taillights.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you have your auto headlights turned off, but you have your daytime running lights on, which I can set in all of our cars.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Your daytime running lights are on at 60% intensity, and your taillights aren't on. So it should be very simple. If your headlights are on, your taillights need to be on. There's no reason. I mean, they're LEDs now. They're not going.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, really what it comes down to is daytime running lamps should just include your taillights. That's just...
No, if lights, all the lights on the car should be on. All the lights on the car should be off.
Yeah.
We'll jump into our topic in a little bit, but I want to preface the topic here a little, Derek, by asking you a question. When I tell you I have compiled a list of the worst things, cars, watches, eggs, dishes, cooking paraphernalia. What do you think of? How would you define worse?
Things that are bad and not worth your money buying, have no significant impact in your life or the world in general, just kind of, just not really worth a lot, not of value to making my life better. Sometimes it
Not a.
makes my life worse. I don't know.
I
Just
think that's pretty
junk.
good.
Does that
Yeah,
that 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 clarify worst well enough?
something that never added value to the world.
Yeah. Or your life. Yeah.
I think that would be a good way to look at it. So, okay, I was just double checking the Facebook feed because I got an alert, but it's up there. We got in our likes. We're getting our love. Everybody out there loving. So, any car news between you or I, or anything spectacular happening?
Oh man, I don't think so, John. It's been kind of a slow week, I think. So I don't really have anything big on the car front. Just whether it's personal car or anything going on at work, I've really been pretty slow.
Pretty boring. Yeah.
Ooh, Toby, I like it. Toby came in and said that worst can be defined as no socially redeeming value. So
Well, that's kind of what I said.
academic. I mean, very,
Yes. No, but that's exactly it. You're not adding value at all. He's saying socially. I'm just saying to the world in general.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I can't think of anything exciting or special that's happened automotive wise for me. So I was at an event on Saturday, and we have this guy that runs around here, sells Hot Wheel cars. Smith, the Hot Wheel guy, he got me. I bought the limited edition mini Christmas edition, and I bought a blue CRX Hot Wheel to go in my Hot Wheel display case, which may eventually become part of the background for the show as opposed to the big no driving gloves logo.
Ooh. I gotta get I gotta work on the studio. I'm sure people are sick of seeing a landscape painting of a wildflower field behind me on a brick wall every week.
I sent you one of my Salvador Dalis.
I'd be good with that. Actually, I have if it was bigger, I have an original Tom Peters, but it's kind of small and you wouldn't really see it. But
We'll leave Tom's Peter alone. No,
no, right,
I don't
no.
mean to.
You put the S in the wrong spot. Tom Peters. Yeah, you got to make sure you put the S in the right spot.
Yeah, that'd be a cool picture. I guess you're right. I assume it's a little small, but you'll figure out something out there. There's a lot of good backdrops, and you'll get that studio there. You seem to use your studio or your future studio location for more of a, what do I want to say,
Workshop,
garage, and actually work on cars in it as opposed to make it a studio.
Yeah, that's one of the problems.
I had that huge shop a couple of houses ago, and I had the podcast studio in it, and the only time I ever went out there was to podcast. So, yeah, that's the difference between you and I a little bit. You get your hands dirty. I look at computer screens.
So is that if a guy, I just thought about this, if a guy was working on a French car and he broke some of his nails and damaged them, is that a male French manicure?
Maybe. I don't know.
I'm just wondering. You damage your fingernails on a French car. I mean, French manicure for a guy.
I'm trying to look up a potential answer here.
A potential answer for the French manicure?
Yeah. Toby asked, how do you double the value of a Yugo? I think the correct answer is you put the Fiat 128 badge on it.
I thought maybe we'd save that one for a little later in the show.
Well, he brought it up.
Fill the tank. Nice.
Toby, you can double the value of a Cadillac or a Ferrari by filling the tank anymore, by the way. Depending where you're at gas price wise.
Yeah.
I could get into that too. Cross the state line and gas went from $2.76 a gallon to $3.35 by just crossing from Mississippi into Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet home Alabama. But yeah, I guess we could jump in at the Yugo. It makes this list from Dan Neal of one of the 50 worst cars of all time, which, as I jokingly said, but is true. The Yugo is basically a slightly modified Fiat 128. It's basically built off of the whole same structure, and you got to spell Yugo right.
Yes.
It comes up 8 times in this article.
All
the
right.
Yugo GV from 1985. Malcolm Bricklin. The Bricklin SV1.
Malcolm. We're jumping kind of ahead, though, John.
Well, I think we're just going 50. We're not going to jump I didn't want to do the list completely in a row, but.
Oh, okay. Well, never mind then.
Yeah. But.
Well, then if you don't want to do it in the row.
Why don't you give us some background on this article that we're going to go through and express our no driving gloves take on?
I don't know. It's there. I mean, so Dan Neal, staff member for Time Magazine.
Actually, I think he's with the Wall Street Journal now.
Well, now he's with the Wall Street Journal. Sorry. Okay. This article came out on April 25th, 2017, by then Time staff writer. How's that? Dan Neal. Dan, if you're listening, we're going to have some fun with your article tonight. And he basically evidently was assigned, or he decided he would figure out what the 50 worst cars of all time, literally the name of the article, were. And he basically went from the late 1890s up to, what was the last year he did? It was early 2000s, I want to say, maybe mid.
He got it almost right up to when
2004. He goes up to 2004 with 50, what he calls the 50 worst cars of all time. I think that's a big check to write, in my opinion, that you're going to put out the 50 worst cars of all time. And I think he personally, I think he missed the boat here on a few things, John. I don't know how you feel about it, but there's some of the cars on here that I don't agree that they should be on this list.
Well, when I originally saw this article, and this article is from Time Magazine, April 25th, 2017, you can quickly Google that and it'll pop up and you can actually read through. There's no way we're going to be able to cover all 50 cars tonight.
No.
But there is no preface. There is no qualifications given for this article. The article reads, Time and Dan Neal, a Pulitzer Prize-winning automotive critic, look at the greatest lemons of the automotive industry. And then it lists 50 cars with, I'm assuming, Mr. Neal expressing his opinion and trying to be humorous. Dan Neal, if you remember was it the car show? I think it was the car show with Adam Carolla back in about that same time period, 2015, 2016, with Adam Carolla. So I'm assuming he's trying to be a little bit of a comedian like Adam. But when I originally saw this, he took anything that could be negative about a car and highlighted it, overlooking the positives about the cars and the faults that he's creating to make some of these the worst cars in history should not be there, or not, aren't the car's faults. It's society's fault. So I guess no socially redeeming value at all for the definition of worst, maybe. But we're going to go through this. Please, if you're watching, give us some feedback. Tell us what's going on. Even if it's after the show, provide commentary, because we probably will revisit this. Part of my temptation for next week is Derek and I will create a list of the 25 worst cars of all time, in our opinions. That might be next week's show. Can't promise it, but that seems like a good topic to follow this episode up. After I'm going to probably say, rip Dan a new one and provide our take on his article. We'll give him the chance to come back and provide his take on our opinions. Where do you even want to jump in onto this, Derek?
Well, I mean, it's like you said, John. No qualifications here that they preface the article with. I do want to correct myself. Dan was not a staff on staff at Time Magazine. I read the byline wrong. The article is by Time staff members and Dan Neal. When I read it, I thought it said by Time staff writer Dan Neal, and I read the byline wrong. So that's a point of clarification. But I mean, I think for me, John, if I'm going to jump in at one spot, it's going to be what I feel is one of the most egregious cars on the list. And because he has the Ford Model T on the list as one of the 50 worst cars of all time. And I don't know.
It's got to be on the list. It's got to be on the list because of the transmission, or the repurposing of materials and recycling the packaging that parts came in, right? Because not everything for the car was built for the car or whatever. Henry Ford recycled packing crates and put it in there. And the shift pattern and the transmission were so hard to use. That's why this car's on the list, right?
No.
Oh.
I will say he prefaces this entry by saying, uh-oh, here comes trouble. Let's stipulate that the Model T did everything that the history books say. Okay, so he does acknowledge that it put America on wheels, it supercharged the nation's economy, transformed the landscape in ways unimagined, yada, yada, yada. But then he says, well, that's just the problem, isn't it? Well, let's back up. It did put America on wheels. Technically, the Model T really kind of put the world on wheels. It put America on wheels, and then it put the world on wheels, because we have to remember, once Henry was, building all of his assembly plants in the U.S., he started realizing, hey, I got to build one in England. I got to build one over there. I got to build one over there, so that I can distribute these things worldwide and get everybody around the world buying them, because that's how I'm going to make more money and get the automobile around the world. So just a point of clarification there. But he goes into that, this is the problem, isn't it? And the stretches that he makes here. The Model T, whose mass production technique was the work of engineer William C. Clan, and of course Henry Ford, who had visited the slaughterhouse's disassembly line. True, they did take the assembly line from the disassembly lines of the slaughterhouses, conferred to Americans the notion of automobility as something akin to natural law, a right endowed by our Creator. I don't know. How do you make that connection? How do you say that because an idea to assemble something, which was basically reversing the slaughterhouse butcher line, the disassembly line, how do you come up with the idea that they were conferring that it was uh, making Americans believe that this was natural law and automobiles were a right and I mean, this is a stretch. It's just ridiculous.
Please note that in this article, creator is
Oh
capitalized.
yes, and it is
So I am taking that God stepped in and assisted in this assembly disassembly line.
yeah.
I don't want to get too religious, but it is creator is capitalized.
Yeah. And then, a century, this is a really good part, John. A century later, the consequences of putting every living soul on gas-powered wheels are piling up, from the air over our cities to the sand under our soldiers' boots. I'm sorry. Can we go back and remember what the air over our cities was like when we had horse-drawn carriages and buggies running around New York City? And so many horses were dying, they would just leave the carcass on the side of the road. The feces of the horses was building up in the streets, and people were dying from airborne diseases from these rotting carcasses and the feces mixed together being on a hot, dry summer being powdered and put into the air. The automobile, when it started, was a green technology based on especially inner city experiences for people.
Please keep in mind if you have ever had the privilege to drive through the Midwest, this aroma that sat in our cities at the turn of the century that Derek's describing would be very akin to driving by a hog farm or a major cattle farm or a chicken farm. The stench, even think of when you drive, because not everybody gets that privilege, but we've all driven by a dead skunk on the road. Kind of that smell 24/7 in our cities. I mean, yes, not being able to breathe in Los Angeles in the late 70s, that's one thing too. I mean, horrible smell, not being able to breathe. But to say,
But in some cases, John, in the summers in places like New York and LA, when it was all horse drawn, you could barely breathe on hot summer days when the powdered dust was in the air. And when you did breathe it, just like in the 1970s LA, you were breathing in something that could kill you. You were breathing in something that bred disease. And so, okay, yes, are there problems with the emissions from automobiles? Yeah, but guess what? There are problems with the emissions from animals too,
yeah, and they
especially in
actually
tight
have talked about
quarters.
that. They've talked about that recently about hog farms and cow pastures and that, and the methane gases that they give off and how that's depleting the ozone. So we can't have our cows fart, we can't have our pigs poop, and we can't have our gasoline automobiles, and it's all because of the Model T.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's the Model T's fault. Mhm.
Yes, maybe history's going to come back, and this is the way history is anymore, and it drives me freaking nuts that stuff that was perfectly acceptable in one time period because of the time period gets looked at decades later as wrong or immoral or incorrect. And I'm not going to get into the politics where we come, but here we are, we're looking at go, ooh, maybe the Model T was a mistake being a gasoline powered motor. Maybe we shouldn't have embraced that. Maybe we should have made the Baker Electric the Model T. Maybe the government should have funded them and helped them. We can't keep going back and looking at history and penalizing history for what happened because of history. The technology wasn't there, the infrastructure wasn't there. But because of the Model T, we have this major transportation revolution. We're able to travel the country, we're able to get from point A to point B. This is freaking ridiculous. And this is probably what set me off mainly on this article. And Toby's going crazy. I can't even keep up with what he's typing because I think he feels the same way. This is, the first or the second sentence, here comes trouble on this car. How would you even conceive of putting this car on there?
Yeah.
You want to put a problem. How about Louis Chevrolet, who made a competitor to the Model T? If it wasn't for the competitor to the Model T would probably still exist. And it was really a reasonably efficient, et cetera, car. So I think Chevrolet's first model, that's one of the worst cars. I mean,
but here's the thing. Like, number one, yes, John, I completely agree with you. And what it is it's convenience, right? It's convenience that we go back and blame history. And that is a terrible thing to do. But also, one thing I've said on the show before is I will, if I pick something up and I read a historical inaccuracy in a book, I stop. I will not read that book. If you cannot get your historic information correct in a book, and I'm talking nonfiction here, right? I don't really read fiction books. Nonfiction, I like to learn and read about real things. And if you can't get your information right, you don't belong writing these articles and these books. And the very last line of this is, and by the way, with its blacksmithed body panels and crude instruments, the Model T was a piece of junk, the Yugo of its day. All right, let's back up the truck here, Dan, because the panels weren't blacksmithed on the car, because when it started they were wood, so if anything they were a carpenter making them, or a cabinet maker. And number two, crude instruments, you mean no instruments, because there were no gauges in the Model T until well into its run, and then it was an amperes gauge, so you knew whether or not the thing was charging. So if you can't even get correct what it had as a body and as instrumentation and all of that, then you have no right calling it out as one of the worst cars in history, because it wasn't. And also, question for you, Dan, if you're listening or if you hear this and you want to come on the show, what about all the cars Henry built before this that led up to the Model T? Don't those play a factor in this? The N, the R, the S, and all the other ones that came before it?
Now, I'm going to close this one out by commenting on, this statement by Toby. I'm going to jump into the middle of it. And of course, it just jumped off of my screen. Let's see here. Rainy days, don't skip and fall because that ain't mud. When I was in Charleston, North Carolina last year, vacation, they pointed out that there were a lot of the edges of the street, because of their historical society, these things can't be moved. There's these things that look like low benches, but they're actually steps. And they were to step up into the carriage so that you didn't step into the manure, because the manure was so thick in the streets that they actually had to shovel it out, every single night. It's, careful what you wish for. We got rid of the horses, and then we got gasoline cars that are killing us now. So we got to jump into something else. I mean, we could spend the whole show killing that one.
Comparing apart the Model T entry. Yeah. So I went with the Model T, John. What one automotive speaking here, which one grinds your gears the worst?
I gotta leave that one because I know we're gonna get to it. I don't know which one. I mean, the whole list I'll hit this one because of my past. The 1958 Lotus Elite Type 14. This has to be the only list that I've ever read that it is one of the worst cars. Yes, Lotus break and have trouble, and the original cars, I mean, it's a Colin Chapman thing. The fiberglass was so thin on the rear parcel shelf that the differential mated to, they would tear out of the cars. And actually every Lotus, what company was it? One of the original kit car companies actually helped develop and strengthen the Lotus Elite and fix this. But we're sitting here in a day that we go crazy for our Pagnanis, or we pay an extra $100,000 or $200,000 to have bare carbon fiber Ford GTs. Dan's right here. Fiberglass was the 50s carbon fiber. It was lightweight. It was cheaper than aluminum. I mean, he's really good with this, you know, and the Corvette and the Darren were done with fiberglass bodies, and Lotus was getting into fiberglass. And Lotus, this experiment or journey into fiberglass for Lotus, Chapman was so into this technology, he ended up buying a boat company and furniture companies so that he could learn what fiberglass would do. There was a series of boats built in the 70s called the Moonrakers, just like the James Bond movie, but these boats came first, that were very kind of cutting edge because it brought fiberglass technology. But you know, he said in here, the reason this car was a problem is the fiberglass couldn't take the structural strain. The first model year, yes, but that problem was fixed. How many cars have had issues? The rule is you don't buy a car in the first model year.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
things creep up. Now, Chapman, founder of Lotus and ran Lotus until his untimely passing in 1982, or his relocation to Argentina in 1982, depending on who you talk to and who you believe, always used the public as its R&D department. I've mentioned on the show before that when you worked for Lotus, you parked as far away from the building as possible, because as he would walk into the factory or the corporate headquarters, so be it in the day, he would always be scanning the cars in the parking lot. And it's very possible you'd come out at the end of the day and your door handle would be gone or your taillight would be gone or something, because he'd see something that he might want to try on one of his cars and he'd just remove it from yours. So, I mean, yes, he had an interesting R&D department, but he was always cutting edge, never apologized for the issues. He looked at everything about a car as a part, which unfortunately, if you were one of his race car drivers, you were just a part. So, you know, he looked at him as a tool, and if you die, do we just go get another tool? So, well, I mean, there were issues with, yeah,
there was one driver that was not that way for him, but
well, yes, well, he ended up doing the same thing. I think that's where we end up started rolling into Graham Hill, but
yeah,
but the Elite has been commented as one of the most beautiful cars. The dash profile of the car matches the exterior profile of the car. There's so many little styling cues to this. What it brought to the sports car world is unbelievable. The Barber Museum actually has a Lotus Elite body that is unpainted. It is bare fiberglass, this cool thing that everybody wants with their carbon fiber cars now. It's freaking ugly. It is like a baby poop tan, but they've got it illuminated so that you can see, it lights through it. It's really cool because of the technology this car brought. Again, this is another thing that Dan's pointed out is one of the worst cars, but it is so innovative and other than the Kaiser Darren and the Corvette before it, it's kind of a first. And that's the way it is. Are we going to look back at carbon fiber cars in what would this be 70 years and make fun of them? And oh, they were horrible, they broke, they were unreliable, the carbon would shatter. If the carbon weave wasn't right, there were structural integrity problems. Again, like I said, we got to quit looking back at this. You've got to look at the advancements this stuff makes. You've got to, what is it? You got to crawl before you can walk. And that's exactly what this is. It's
Well,
not.
here's my problem with it, John, is, how does the elite get on this list? Because of, okay, some, the stress issues and in which they learned from and fixed. He mentions the Corvette in the very beginning of this part about the elite. How does the first 3 years, well, let's go 2 years, 53 and 54 of Corvette not make it on this list then? Because the fiberglass on those, they were gel coating them too quick. They were trapping the gases in the fiberglass. They weren't letting it off gas properly. And within the first couple of years, you would have a Corvette with basically pimples all over the body, gas bubbles that are trying to get out from under the gel coat. And they were just bursting out of the body. And the thing looked like it had chicken pox running around. Oh, and let's not even forget the underpowered reworked stove bolt 6-cylinder engine that was in them that for the day was pretty impressive in a lightweight, lightweight car. But as Jason just jumped in and I was about to say, they came with automatic. So even the power that they were able to make out of that 6-cylinder engine had to go through an automatic transmission in a sports car. You didn't even have a stick shift. How do you put the elite on this list and not have the 53 and 54 Corvette on this list?
Well, what's funny is all that stuff you point out, I believe, is the same stuff that he goes off on in a later car, the Corvette 305 California from 1980, because of emissions and underpowered, and a 305 V8 in a Corvette and 180 horsepower. And, and let's see here, it used a torque sapping 3-speed automatic transmission. Yeah, it was a dark day for the automotive industry, but you did the best you could. And everything you said was wrong with the 53 Corvette. A lot of that shows up here in 1980 in the Corvette, except I'm thinking in 1980 in the Corvette, maybe this was somebody at GM saying, this is the California model and this is what we got to sell in California. And maybe let's go Sheriff Buford T. Justice here. You some bitches in California need to get your legislator in check so that we can sell proper cars. To me, car people will do some shady things or send a message in a certain way. And maybe the Corvette California, 305 California, as he calls it, was sending a message as opposed to really trying to be a Corvette. Maybe I'm wrong. Derek's got a little bit more Corvette knowledge than me, but
well, it was a terrible. The 305 in the Corvette was terrible. It just was. But then take 50 cars from 1976 to about 1986 and just put them on the list, because you want to talk about the worst time in American automotive history. There you have it. The decade of emissions and OPEC and everything that was going on, and everybody reducing horsepower and doing everything they could to get better fuel, gas mileage. That was terrible. But it's just, again, okay, maybe with the 305 V8 Corvette, that might deserve a place on this list because of how bad it was. But again, for the time period, it's what was going on. I really like the comment Jason just made because he said, but 53 to 55 is still my favorite vet. Yes, still one of my favorite Corvettes is the what I call the first series of the first generation, the first body style. Uh, and he says, they were still a paradigm shift, is what I think what he's saying here. And it goes back to exactly what we were saying about the Model T. Although the 53, 54, even 55 Corvettes had some problems, it was a paradigm shift. It was a revolution in the idea of American sports cars. It was the same thing the Model T was for the automobile. Did they have their drawbacks? Yes. Were they the worst cars in history? No.
No, and looking at this list, we know pretty much all these cars on this list. Now, some we might know because they were problematic, like the 84 Maserati bi-turbo. But we know these cars. I think the 50 worst cars in history are the ones we've forgotten about, the ones we don't know exist. That's, if it created a memory, maybe it did. Okay, maybe it did create a memory because it was so bad we haven't forgotten it. But some things were so bad or mundane. Maybe that's what I'm thinking. Maybe I'm wrong. The 50 most mundane cars are the ones we can't remember. I just had a conversation, and I'm sorry to keep pulling cars here, Derek, but we're talking about engine performance. And I just interviewed the owner of the local Maserati dealership, and his first car was this. And he couldn't even remember what it was, but it was the Camaro Iron Duke from 1982, 90 horsepower, V6, 2.5 liter, 4-cylinder, not even a 6. And he talked about how slow it was and miserable it was. But he also talked about it was a good first car. I actually had a cousin get killed in a V6 Camaro. So maybe the 2.5 wasn't a bad way to have a cool car, but preserve some teenagers' lives in that. But he said the Iron Duke Camaro had a 0 to 60 time of around 20 seconds. So, but again, we're talking coming out of a recession, coming out of the OPEC fuel crisis, dealing with emissions, getting ready to convert to fuel injected vehicles and start moving into that. It was a stopgap, but it kept the brand alive and it sold cars and it brought money in. I mean, I just have a problem with innovation and necessity being called the worst.
Well,
I'll let you.
I agree with that, John, because again, I think it goes back to there's no parameters for this article. There's no rubric for what makes the list because okay, the Iron Duke engine is on here because it was slow, right? And it had a terrible 0 to 60 and all the things that are listed here, and my screen just jumped on me, so now I'm missing this part of the article. But okay, so it wasn't great as a sports car engine, but quality-wise, the Iron Duke, by most, is respected as a pretty well-built engine that didn't have a lot of problems and was actually engineered fairly well. It didn't make a lot of power, but again, look at the time period we're talking about and what they were trying to do, which you just covered, John. So what's the rubric here? What makes these? This is what I'm saying. This is just somebody out there like, I didn't like that car, so it's one of the 50 worst cars all time. There's just nothing. I don't know. To me, it's ridiculous because okay, let's not talk about the fact that the Iron Duke engine was a good quality engine. Oh, it was just slow. So how dare it be in the Camaro? And that's what bugs me.
It's, I don't know. We talks about there was a time when 90 horsepower was a lot, and that time was 1932. If you jump ahead 2 years, everybody raved about the first CRX, and it's, I think, 60 horsepower. Yeah, it was a little bit lighter car, two-seater, a little bit smaller car, but they loved the 60 horsepower. And then the 85 CRX SI that came out kind of revolutionized the world. And it was 92, I think it was 92, might have been 96 horsepower. So 90 horsepower is just fine.
Well, but also let's think about this. 90 horsepower was a lot in 1932. What engine is he referencing there? The 90, well, actually, it wasn't even 90 horse in 1932, but by the late 1930s, what year did it come? I'm trying to remember what year it came out now, but it was the flathead Ford V8 became a 90 horse engine. Yeah. And so now he's referencing essentially, I mean, there were other 90 horse engines at the time, but they were massive, they were expensive, they were not affordable in any means. But you're talking about basically a V8 in the 1930s compared to a 4-cylinder engine turning out 90 horse. We're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about the fact that it took pistons, in a 4-cylinder engine in the early days of the automobile. You had to have pistons the size of literally a Folgers coffee can to be able to make 60 to 90 horsepower. And it all had to be cast iron and weigh a metric ton to be able to do it. So, qualification here, 90 horsepower in the Iron Duke 4-cylinder. Cool. It was a compact little engine that made 90 horsepower. You know what it took to make 90 horsepower in the early days of the automobile? Half the car.
I was checking something. Jason was commenting on, but no, Jason, the Countach did not make the list. The Lamborghini LM002 did, but the Countach didn't. I believe that and the Ferrari Mondial were here.
Which I really just think the fact that the Lamborghini LM002, I don't remember exactly how they referenced it, made the list, just says that Lamborghini should not try to make SUVs. There you go. Just Lamborghini, stop making SUVs, stick with exotic cars.
I'm going to have to let you go because there's just so many cars on this list that I don't know if we're going to make it a 2-hour show tonight or if we're going to follow this up next week. But
well, I mean, Toby already mentioned it, so let's just throw it out here really quick because I don't want to, gloss over the fact that Toby mentioned it. But Toby, the Cadillac V864 engine did make the list. You mentioned it earlier in the beginning of the show. It was a valiant effort by General Motors to do this engine, but it was a terrible engine. Believe me, some of my fondest, and I'm using that word sarcastically, childhood memories are having a father who worked in GM body shops and at dealerships and worked on the service side with the mechanics and everybody. Most of the conversations I recall were a lot of what was it that George Carlin always did? The 7 words you're not supposed to say. In reference to the GM V864 engine. So probably something that truly does deserve to be on this list. Although it was an attempt to make an interesting transition into something in the automotive world, which we have today. And that does work to this day where we can shut cylinders down.
Yeah, I mean, it was a innovative idea, and what I didn't see on this list was the General Motors diesel from the same time frame, where you took a gasoline motor,
We
and
don't
tried to
talk,
make
we don't talk about that.
we take a gas motor and try to make it diesel. They were wonderful ideas, and somebody had to build these, and somebody had to put them out for, as it says, that the cylinder deactivation is in almost every V8 car now. And we wouldn't be there today without this. So, yeah, it might have, because of the problems, it might have made for a horrible car. Would it make it the worst? I see, that's where we need that qualification. I don't think it makes it the worst because it was the beginning of innovation. You can't. I heard a joke today. Everybody talks about the invention of the first telephone. Do you know what? The first telephone is absolutely worthless. Do you know what made the first telephone worth something?
The second telephone.
Exactly.
Ahoy.
If you didn't make the first one, which is absolutely worthless because it can't do anything, at that point, it's the worst invention in the world. But when you make that second one, now it's starting to be a good idea. And that's the same thing to me that the V864 did. Yeah, it was a bad idea. It wasn't a bad idea. It just needed refinement. So same with the General Motors diesel. And we'll hit the other one Toby talked about was that the Yugo. We can't pass that up. So
well, yeah, we'll jump to the Yugo next because we're coming up on time here. But John, it's one of the things that we talked about in the pre-show. And funny enough, a number of the vehicles on this list play into my daily life at work and my career in general. A number of these cars, the Lane Motor Museum has in its collection, and other museums I've worked for have in their collections. And one of the things I always like to say when giving a presentation at the museum, talking about some of these cars and some of the craziness that we can represent with the vehicles we have at Lane is, all of these were it was a good idea at the time. It was an idea worth experimenting with and attempting to innovate upon. And it just takes time to figure out if it can be practical or not. So in the case of the 864 engine, yeah, it was a good idea that they didn't have fully sorted out, but over time it became practical and we figured out how to do it. So it doesn't mean that it's one of the worst cars ever, although I said, the engine, I think that specific engine possibly one of the worst engines of time because of all the failures it had, all the issues it had, but does it mean that the car it went in was the worst car of all time? I don't think so. Uh-oh. John went away. But it does say we're still live, so I assume we are still broadcasting. Jason, Toby, or Pam, or anyone that's in the comments, let me know if we are still broadcasting, if you would, and I will jump up to the. All right, thank you, Jason, and thanks everybody that's in the comments tonight for commenting and joining us in this episode. Well, I'm waiting for John to get back because I think I'm going to wait for him to get back to go with the Yugo. Another car on this list that I don't call it the worst car. It might be a bad decision on General Motors' part. The 1982 Cadillac Cimarron makes the list, and of course, The interesting thing with the Cimarron, for anyone out there that remembers this car, it was a fancied up, dressed up Chevy Cavalier with Cadillac badges on it. Now, this isn't uncommon in the automotive industry where you've got one car, one vehicle that gets some tweaks to interiors and badging and little things here and there, maybe a different engine, similar engine that mounts in the same, but they just kind of tweak it up a little bit. Think of Ford F-150 and the Lincoln. I forgot the name of it, but the Lincoln pickup truck, the Mark whatever the pickup truck was, it basically was a Ford F-150 with a different front end on it, Lincoln badging, and a fancy interior. But this was the Cimarron at the time, and the biggest problem is between the Cavalier and the Cimarron, it was like, no, the Blackwood was a still F-150 based, but slightly different. I'm thinking of the Lincoln. It was the Mark something. The Blackwood, but same principle with the Blackwood, Jason. But they charged like with the Cimarron, and this is 1982 era. I'm trying to remember. I think GM had a markup on the Cimarron of like $4,000 or more over the Cavalier, just because of the badging and the Cadillac name. So, not a great idea by General Motors to do it, especially with something Cavalier level. Not a fancy car by any means, but again, one of the worst 50 cars of all time. No, no, not at all, not at all. The Cavalier and the Cimarron were extremely important cars at the time. Jason throwing out a couple more cars, and one of them that makes the list, the Avalanche. Oh, actually, no, I'm sorry. The Avalanche didn't make the list. I'm thinking, in my head, I had that wrong. The Pontiac Aztec made the list, Jason. So the Avalanche did not, neither did the Cadillac EXT. Again, it only goes up to 2004. And I don't know why if you write it in 2017. Evidently, maybe he thinks every car after 2004 is a great car. So we evidently, after 2004, we figured it out. And there are no cars that will make the 50 worst cars list after 2004. So, I mean, that's 13 years of cars that had been out. So the Aztec does make the list again. While I'm hopefully, I almost mentioned it, Jason, but yeah, Tom Peters was involved in that vehicle. Although there's some great stories behind that vehicle, so maybe we'll get Tom on the show one of these days and chat about the Pontiac Aztec, because believe me, I had conversations with him and a few of the other GM folks about that car, being such a Pontiac lover myself. Just picking their brains, like what was that about? What was it? And they dove into the story of it. It's actually pretty interesting what they were attempting to do there, and how engineering and design tried to work that out. And it's better to have people like Tom explain it. So maybe we'll try to get Tom on the show one of these days. But I'll run through just quickly some of the other ones that made the list here: the Chevy SSR, the Hummer H2. Not the most beautiful car in the world, I'll say that. The BMW 7 Series from 2002. Obviously, the Aztec, the Jaguar X-Type from 2001. Let's see. The Ford Excursion from 2000. Now, this one's interesting to me because the big problem that Dan has with this vehicle here is that it's so big. It's just gigantic. He goes through all the 19 feet long. It stood 6.5 feet tall. It weighed 7,000 pounds. Yeah, it was a massive SUV built on the F-250, 350 platform. Okay, it was an overgrown Chevrolet Suburban. I mean, it was a larger version of the Suburban, but by Ford. But the thing he glances over here in this, and just the fact that, oh, it's so big and it's so large, and people are driving it around cities, and it pollutes, and well, it was 2000. I mean, it still had pollution control on it. But the thing that he's missing here is two of probably some of the best modern Ford engines were in this vehicle, the 7.3 liter diesel and the Triton V10. Two amazing engines came out of this program for the Ford trucks, the F 250, 350 Excursions, all of these, and were fantastic engines. I mean, these are the Excursion, the F 250, the F 350 of this era with the 7.3 diesel are to this day some of the best diesel vehicles ever built. These trucks run forever. These diesels are almost bulletproof. I mean, they are so sought after. I've actually been looking for one myself as a tow vehicle, and eh, you can't believe what a low mileage one costs because they are so sought after. I've found a few that are under like 75,000 miles, and in some cases, I mean, this is a 2000. We're talking about a 25-year-old truck here. I would be spending the same money to get that 25-year-old truck that I would spend to go out and get a truck that's 4 years old, used and 4 years old, a 2020 truck, because people know that these are some of the best trucks ever built. So, my question, how does that make one of the 50 worst cars, on Dan's list here? So, yeah, again, this is one of those lists where I don't think parameters were set. I don't think a rubric was created, whatever you want to say. And he just kind of went on tangents on cars that he and other staff writers didn't like, that they knew about. So that's the problems I have with the list. And hey, everybody, John is joining us back. Whoa.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I'm sorry. I gotta figure out what I'm doing wrong.
Got some technical difficulties. There we go. He muted it. That's better. I assume he can still hear us, so that's okay. But to recap, so when John can come back to us on the mic, I just went through a few of the vehicles that are on the list, John, and just kind of let people know. Oh, there he goes. Hey, he's back. I just was letting people know some of the other vehicles on the list, and then I launched into a tangent on why the Ford Excursion is on the list, when the era of Ford truck that he is referencing there had two of the greatest engines probably in modern Ford history to come out of that platform, which were the 7.3 diesel and the Triton V10. And there's no mention of the fact that those things are bulletproof and are highly sought after to this day.
Oh, I heard some of that. I was trying to get logged back in, and it was a whole technical issue. The internet went down for a moment because of the rain we alluded to at the beginning of the show. But I totally agree with you. I don't see how you can put the Ford Excursion on this list and not put the Chevy Suburban on there. It just didn't, didn't make sense to me. I knew people with Excursions, the V10s, the diesels, and it went away only because of the general public, and they still sell it, but they don't call it the Excursion. They just call it the Expedition XL. But it's not quite the same thing. The Excursion was just, it was it was built on a, a 1-ton truck chassis, and it's phenomenal for what it was built to do. Unfortunately, as I alluded to with the Corvette California, there's certain people that just don't understand the necessity because they'll never do anything like that. But I'm sorry I went away, but go ahead and go with your so.
Well, I was just going to say, do we want to wrap this up tonight, or do you want to address the Yugo? I was holding off on the Yugo, hoping you would join us again. So I didn't want to launch into it without you here.
Well, when we went away with the Yugo, I was trying to find, and it's going to be virtually impossible to find, the late great David E. Davis wrote an article when he owned automobile.
I'll stall for you while you're looking for it. Because did you ever have a chance to meet David?
No, I have never met David.
I had a chance, many times to chat with him. He was, of course, from the Ypsilanti, Ann Arbor, Michigan area, and numerous events that I would go to, he would be at. He actually had a small office in one of the storage buildings I used to hang out at for cars. David, in my opinion, probably one of the great automotive journalists that have lived, and as a person, just one of the greatest people you would have ever met. I loved getting the chance to talk to David when I'd see him, and he was always up for a conversation about cars, usually with all of us, but he was just the coolest, laid back, nicest guy. And I mean, just because you said his name, it brought that back. And man, I hope people out there listening, some of you had a chance to meet him. I always enjoyed talking to the man.
I've never met him, but his articles, and one of the reasons I'm a car guy and followed it. And like I'm saying, I remember one of his articles shortly after he founded Automobile Magazine. He used to write an article. It was one of the back pages, and he purchased. He wasn't given. He purchased his daughter Yugo GV. It might have been like a GVX or something, and he raved about it. And like I said, they were a derivative of the Fiat 128, which isn't a great car by any means, but is built for a purpose. Where the Yugo failed is like the smart car failed. The Yugo and the Fiat were built for short commutes, for rough roads, for the Italian roads and Italian countryside in Yugoslavia, and the Middle East. And they weren't designed to get on the interstate and travel, I guess at the time, 55 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour for hundreds of miles. They were designed for these short little commutes. They'd be great farm cars if you had a farm and you lived in, middle of Midwest in a farming community. But they were not designed to be the way Americans use cars. And that's what killed the smart car. That's what killed the Scion, whatever it was called. I always forget. I always wanted one, though. The little Scion that looked like the smart car. It wasn't a good car for America, but it was a good car for the market that it was built for. Kind of like the Model T. It was simple. It was easy to fix, with baling wire and twine and a pair of pliers. So while Americans don't think highly of the Yugo, and part of the Yugo problem was it was marketed as a cheap car, not inexpensive, but as a cheap car, $39.90, brand new. It's maybe worst cars sold in America. Maybe it deserves to be on that list. Worst cars ever. I don't think it does. That's my opinion on the Yugo. I know a lot of guys that have owned the Yugo convertibles and love them. You know, it's just,
Well,
you
that's
know,
it's what it comes down to, John. I mean, understanding what the car was made for, the time frame it was built in, and you know, where was it meant to be used, right? I mean, what does Dan think about the Duchevaux, the Citroen 2CV? Yeah, was that a good car? Was it a bad car? Because to some people, it's probably not a great car. But for what France was trying to do, and what Michelin, yes, Michelin, the tire company, owned Citroen at the time, what they were trying to do to get France, the rural parts of France, transportation, it's the perfect car.
and I mean, it's what car was I thinking of? Or Jason alluded to it earlier. He was asking if the Countach was on this list because most people, it, it's not a great car. I mean, it has problems. I mean, it's a Lamborghini. Hell, till Volkswagen bought Lamborghini, Lamborghinis were always problematic. I remember looking at a friend's. Um, I can't think of what came before Gallardo, and looking at the back and going, "I'm not the best welder, but I couldn't believe these were factory welds on a Lamborghini. It wasn't row of dimes or anything. It was blob, 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 blob." And I'm going, so, you know, and that was right at the turn of Volkswagen Lamborghini.
Hey,
But a
coat,
Countach,
coat hangers are cheap and they work wonders, John.
but a Countach, it it wasn't built to drive around New York City. It wasn't built to drive around, you know, LA rush hour traffic. It was built to get out and go 110 miles an hour between LA and Vegas. It was designed to, it's a GT car. It's designed to get out and tour and go, cover long distances fast. Same thing with a Testarossa. Yeah, they're a little bit more reliable, maybe a little bit more comfortable, a little bit easier to get in and out, but they're not the best car to have in rush hour traffic. That's where you want your Camry. Camry, horrible car on a racetrack, you know, but great car to commute with. McLaren F1, great car on a racetrack, not so bad to commute with, but is it really where it belongs? So there has to be qualifications to this list. We might revisit this list in the next few weeks. I think Derek and I should come back next week with a list of what we think are some of the worst cars ever made, and we'll qualify it. Cars that really should have never been built. There was no excuse for them, but that's where I feel.
I'll just print off pretty much the collection list from Lane Motor Museum and just highlight 25 cars.
I was going to do the one from National Corvette. Oh, excuse me. But no, I mean there are problematic cars, and there are cars that, you know, have no redeeming value. But unfortunately, this list from Dan, most of these cars, I think, either didn't belong in the United States, didn't belong, or didn't need to exist in the way they were used, or had benefits that absolutely outweighed being horrible and making them the worst cars. And that was my whole problem when I first saw this article 3 or 4 years ago, 7 years ago. And it popped back up in my life. And I go, no, we really need to talk about this and try to really figure out where he was coming from. So
I don't know that he was coming from anywhere, John. I think he just
I wonder
went
what you
and
get paid to
picked some
write one of
cars.
these articles.
Yeah, I don't know.
So, with that, I'm going to get out of here before my internet crashes again. Go see if my car in the driveway floated away.
Yeah.
And anything you got to wrap up with, Derek? Or
I'll just say what I say every week, guys. That is the show. That is a wrap. And if you're enjoying No Driving Gloves and being part of the No Driving Gloves community, QR code here on the screen, buy us a coffee, head over to the social medias, give us a like, do all that wonderful stuff to help us. And as I always show, as I always say, the best thing you can do for us, help us grow, share the show, bring us some more people. That's all we need.
yep, tell somebody about the show. Like, hit that bell, whatever you got to do on YouTube. I'm still not too familiar with that YouTube stuff, but tell somebody about the show. And with that, it's time to get off your ass, go burn some gas, because John is out.